Alrighty, welcome back. We have our 9th place Oceania Regionals God Trunks list for today. So over the weekend in Australia, having our regional event in person, I believe it was 54 players from memory, somewhere around there anyway. Green Gohan ended up topping the event. I would honestly say probably the strongest deck of the format. Good player as well, obviously. But if you are looking to pick up one of the stronger decks, I would recommend investing in Gohan. Obviously, the cards are new. They might be a little bit expensive, but they'll drop eventually. He's one of the best leaders, probably generically in the game now. Apart from his small engine that you have to run, it's a pretty open deck. Not to say that green is the best color to run anymore, because that's still definitely not the case. Yellow is probably your tier 1 color in terms of staples. It just has the best of the best. Red and blue are probably a close second. If you are looking to play competitively, they're still options and they're still viable. Black and green, unfortunately, are at the bottom of the ladder in terms of playability. It's not to say that they are unplayable and that you can't win with them. You can definitely come high placing, as we saw over the weekend, but you will be fighting an uphill battle. Just something to keep in mind. Myself personally, I only own one color. I only own black, so it somewhat limits my options, but I'm completely fine with that. I'm happy to work with what I've got. Thought process coming into the regional was that I was going to play Hatchiyak, because it's something I had tested for months on months. Do very well at locals with Hatchiyak, despite everyone hating the deck. I've been playing it for sets upon sets now. Actually, the person who came 5th place, M, who played with Hatchiyak, we used to play at locals together, talk about the deck quite a lot, and we thought it was probably the strongest contender for the black choices. Decided to go with Trunks last minute. However, I picked up all the new cards, played it I think 2 times at locals, came first both locals. It's just a deck that people don't expect how aggro it can push that early. I would still describe it as a mid-range deck. However, you can really pop off if people aren't expecting it. And the new support is just insanely crazy for the deck. Hatchiyak, the only reason I decided not to play Hatchiyak was because it is best of 135-minute rounds, and it's not to say that you go into time every game with Hatchiyak, because it's definitely not the case, and usually it's not the Hatchiyak player's fault, it's mainly the opponent, which is, I mean, understandable. You do see a lot of things in the discussion group about Hatchiyak players going to time though. Your plays in Hatchiyak are incredibly quick. It's mainly the opponent figuring out how to respond to the game plan, which is completely fair, because Hatchiyak's one of those decks where you have to play around instead of playing the game around your opponent. So it takes people a little bit longer to figure that out, and they end up stalling their turns out, not intentionally. However, I decided to go with Trunks. I thought 5-10-minute rounds and a 20-minute break in between sounded pretty good for each round. I'll go through the leader quickly, because it has been a while since it's been meta relevant. Activate main on this side, you've got your choose 1 card in your hand, send it to the warp, draw 2, and then your awaken is when you've got 5 Saiyans or 4 or less life. Untap 1, draw 1, flip it over. That stipulation on the awaken is actually pretty important. For 5 Saiyans in your warp, doesn't sound like it's hard to get, but if you do have a high non-Saiyan count in your deck, you are going to suffer and not awaken as early most games. So I would recommend trying to keep your Saiyan count as high as possible. I believe I'm running 52 cards in my main deck, and 42 of them are Saiyans. And 8 cards are the actual engine. So I've only got 2 tech cards that aren't Saiyans. Anyway, flipping over, you've got Super Saiyan God Trunks. On this side, he's a blocker, which is fantastic. This time when he attacks, you draw 2 and then send 1 to your warp, which is good because you need stuff in your warp to play anyway. It's got an auto. When your opponent attacks a unison card once per turn, you switch him to active mode. So he might have swung on your turn, you switch him, and then you can block within the same window because block is already existent on the card. Activate main as well. I actually use this quite a bit now. Spirit boost once per turn. You send 2 black cards from your warp back into your drop, and then you warp one of your opponent's battle cards. Spirit boost used to feel really bad in this deck because your unison was the whole game plan, and if you lost it, you sort of had to restart, search for another one, or pretty much not play the game. With the new Kai support though, it's much more playable. Get this out the way. If you do lose your unison, especially Smoke Dragon that sends it to the warp, you can replay it for 1, so that's really handy. Getting through that one though, onto our Z deck to start with, you have your new Super Saiyan God Trunks Z leader. He's fantastic. It's a free Z awaken by spirit boosting. Again, spirit boost in general is not a fantastic mechanic, but now that the unison's recyclable, it feels a lot better. When you're at 3 life anyway, slap this guy on top for spirit boost and 2 Z energy. He's got the same auto when he attacks, drawing 2 cards and sending 1 to the warp. He's a 20k base now, and the activate main to spirit boost and warp a card is essentially free apart from the spirit boost cost. As well as that, if you have the Kai Unison in play, you gain 5k and double strike in your leader for the turn, which is fantastic, pushing pressure for the end of the game. You have one Vegeta, which essentially never comes up. However, you have so many options in this deck that you may as well utilize them all. Warp and removal is pretty easy in this deck, so your Z deck doesn't have to be fully dedicated to something like Boo or Pan. You can stretch it out a little bit more to other options, but he's still good in a pinch. You've got your 2 Boo, of course, just talking about how you don't need Boo. He is still a good card to have. Your 1 initial Z energy, 2nd initial Z energy to steal a battle card underneath and gain 20k. Another beta, you've got Pan, just for more options. You do run pretty much an entire Xeno deck, apart from a few things like Kai, which are naturally part of that, so they don't have the Xeno tag. She warps a card, activate main as well, if you got the Bond, what was it, Bond 3, yeah. And your last one, Demigra, he fits perfectly with the deck. He synergizes incredibly well. It's just that the 3Z energy cost, the 2 energy cost, and the no protection kills the card pretty much. He's got a permanent, which doesn't really affect us because we don't have a lot of Z energy, but in auto, when you play a card from the warp or you overrealm, you draw a card and warp I believe it's 6 or less from memory. Yeah, 6 or less. So when you do that with your Unison, you're essentially drawing 2 cards, upticking, warping 2 things possibly. It's great, but again, the Z energy is hard to pull off. Most of the time, you have the Z energy for your Z Awaken, and maybe in a game of turn 5 onwards sort of thing, you have time to play 1 more Z card. That's probably all you're getting through. Moving on from that one, however, going into the main deck, going to be starting off, go through the engine pieces. So your Self-Awaken tools, your Unison, etc. Things that are like essential to the deck, you can't run without. You've got your 4 Gohan Self-Awakeners, probably the better of the 2. Send him to your warp in your opening hand. This or the other one is your ideal turn 1 awaken. Turn 1 play, sorry. He is your better turn 1 play. Tapping 1 from the warp, play him, burst up to 3 to your warp, and then he's a blocker for the next turn, so you can keep a high life. The warping 3 is really important. Again, you want them to all be sane so that you can awaken turn 2. And to match that, we have our 4 Goten. I don't think he's as essential to the list as Gohan. However, I don't consider myself an incredibly lucky person, so I prefer to build my decks as consistent as possible as opposed to fitting in as much tech as possible. So again, having 4 of each hopefully guarantees that you see at least 1 turn 1. He does gain crit on the Spirit Boost as well, which I've been using a lot more now that this Unison is recurable. Before, I didn't really want to Spirit Boost and risk blowing up my Unison like I was saying. You've got your Kai here now. It's the only Unison to really play in the deck. She has a uptick that bursts 3 cards to your warp if you would like. Again, good for your awaken. You're probably going to use that once, maybe twice in a game. And then the other auto, which is great, once per turn, it'll uptick by playing a card from your warp, which is basically all we're doing in this deck. And you draw a card. The new Kai, fantastic. Activate main for 1 black. You send it from your warp to the remove from game pile, I suppose. And he lets you take up to 2 life and play another Unison from your warp with 2 markers on it if you don't have a Unison already existing in play. But taking the 2 life is important as well because it can help you get to that 3 life mark to Z Awaken if you want. The way I play the deck, however, I pretty much always try and stay as high life as possible. I did have a yellow margin Vegeta matchup, for example, where I stayed at 7 life the entire game. I beat them down to 7 life, which is you probably wouldn't expect for an aggro match, but the deck has a lot of defensive tools. The correct super combo for the deck, you have Goten. He's live pretty much turn 2, and again, like I said, I prefer to defend high. It gives me more options late game, as opposed to rushing down to the Z Awaken or the 4 life and then being hit by a huge triple, which you can't really do anything about. Anyway though, if you don't have the new promos and stuff, I can still see you using Vegeta just to get the fusion material. Now that the new Vegeta Overrealm's out though, I'd say pretty much 100% stick to this. There's no reason to run anything else. You have your inbuilt floodgate to the deck, your Pan, tap 1, play the card on your opponent's turn when they attack, so counter attack, and then it has an auto. If you want to ditch a card on play, your opponent can't attack for the rest of the turn using battle cards unless they warp 2 from hand, essentially like a topo effect. I don't use the card a lot, however, it's a necessary evil. Most games, maybe I'll use 1 later game, but she's pretty much getting charged. The main thing with her though is she's a floodgate and she's a Saiyan. So it helps towards your deck count of Saiyans. Like I was saying, 42 out of 52 cards, I believe, are Saiyans. And if you look at the engine, you've already got 4 of your new common Kai and 4 of the Unison. So that's 8 slots that aren't Saiyans already. You have to pretty much run in the deck. You could probably cut this one down to 3, but The rest has to stay as it is. You have your 2 double strikers, your Trunks for 1 comes in, boom, Spirit Boost, and then you draw a card obviously off your Unison, and if you've got 10 or more cards in your Warp, against double, which you pretty much will from turn probably 3 onwards. And your linchpin of the deck, you've got your God Trunks coming down from your Warp for 2 energy, black if you have more than 8 cards in your Warp, which you will probably again turn 2 onwards. He's usually a turn 3 play, however. Ideal turn 3 play now is going to be swing with your leader, swing with your Unison, play one of these out for 2 energy, and then you have 1 energy left to play your new Trunks, and then Overrealm as well. So that's, I mean, if you go first especially, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swings, and then a triple strike at the end. This boy coming down for 1, Spirit Boost 1 as well, and Xeno evolving, so the cost is to send this card to the Warp, play this guy in active mode on your board. However, he gets removed from the game, keep that in mind, so he won't actually go to your Warp, he'll just get removed. This new guy though, coming down for 1 energy with the Spirit Boost 1, he has a triple strike and a barrier 30k, which is fantastic. He gets removed as well if he gets removed from the board. On swing, he can warp something, ignoring barrier as well, which is fantastic. You can activate the Xeno Evolve from the Warp too, so he's a good target to pitch early game, or if you happen to get lucky and burst him, fantastic as well. However, you probably only have the chance to play 1 in a game as well. Just something to keep in mind. Now down to your beaters and I suppose tech cards. You have your 3 Gohanks. Still a fantastic promo, not really needed in the deck, but does add more consistency. You fuse using a Gohan and a Trunks. Your deck is full of Trunkses. Your only Gohan Xeno is the blocker, but as I said, you're probably playing him turn 1, so he's in your drop ready to go. If you don't quite hit the 5 Saiyans, you can combo off a Trunks. You should have that Gohan in your drop already from the block, and then you fuse into this guy and you get your Saiyans back in there. It's a free 15k beater though. Don't worry about the second activate main, doesn't really affect us. Fantastic for triggering first play effects, things like Poutine or the new yellow Freezer, etc, etc. But again, more pressure for free is always good. You've got your Overrealm package as well, so you've got your big Beyond All Limit boys, grabbing back anything from 3 to 7 in your deck. Just one of the best generic Overrealms for black. And then you have your new promo Vegeta. He's probably your target to grab back. Overrealms for 6 and free as well. Warps a card on play. Or alternatively, you can tap 1 to play him if you have a Goku 30k on board already existing. Limit 1, your opponent has to have 3 or more energy as well, but they probably will by that point. He gains crit and still gets the on-play warp effect. So this is fantastic pressure, especially early game. If you don't see that Trunks in your warp either, turn 2 you can do the leader Unison, dual attack Trunks, Overrealm a Goku, grab back a Vegeta and play the Vegeta, and that's even more swings as well. And your last tech beater, I suppose, the new Cumber. I originally had it at 3, I cut it down to 2. It is somewhat difficult to play because you've got so much removal in this deck. You never give your opponent really a chance to have 2 battle cards on board. But if he does come up, he's fantastic. Pretty much always choose the double duel and he's a draw, so why wouldn't you for 2 energy? And he's saying, ooh. Moving on from that though, we've got last few things. You've got a little bit more defense and then your one-ofs. Your 2 Gohan negates, again, a Saiyan, fantastic for your deck count. I do like things like your Supreme Kai negate and I suppose petrification, all those other things, but to think they're not Saiyans and it hurts your deck count, like I said, I prefer to play with consistency. This guy though, warps a card if you do it through the Z charge effect, but also the negate is handy late game. Your 2 petrifications, as I was just saying, don't like non-Saiyans, but he is my 9th and 10th non-Saiyan in the deck. Most games saw at least one of these. It does shut big things down, which is fantastic. I don't really see the need to run more than 2 in the deck. You've got so much defense naturally anyway. He's really just for the big beaters. You can combo out or floodgate all the other things or block. Your one-offs now, of course you have your thwarting because it's still a great card. Your fusion targets now being the 30k Goku and the 30k Vegeta. He's just coming down for 1 and applying more pressure. You've got your 1 brainwashed no more. Still a fantastic card. It's a Saiyan, so it's great. It's not a card that'll win you games against experienced players, but it will catch probably newer players off guard. or if someone's just had a long day and they forget about it. And your last card, Evil Saiyan, of course, has the most synergy with the deck. He plays from the warp, so he draws you a card for Unison and upticks it. He's there pretty much every game because you're bursting so much, and he just applies so much pressure. You'll notice I don't have things like Super Kamehameha in my main. It's because I have Cumber. If I feel like my opponent's going to floodgate me, I won't worry about the counterplay. I'll Cumber first, even if it's early game, like they have 5 life. I will Cumber just to prevent them from activating the floodgate effect. I had one Golden Freezer player who reposted me 3 times in 1 turn, and I still managed to push through it thanks to Cumber eating the first one. Moving on to that though, we have a sideboard. Like I was saying, you want Saiyans, so it is hard to run non-Saiyans. We'll get those out the way. You have your Super Kamehameha. It is sometimes needed. I side this one in against my Hachiak matchup. It does hit a lot of those floodgates if you don't see your Cumber. Kuitsukai for the exact same reason, and for Cooler Mill, because this deck does burst a lot. You will struggle against Cooler Mill. Not to say I haven't beaten the Cooler Mill with the deck. You just focus on Unison and Leader beatdown, but he does prevent them from arrivaling those cards or toppling, token negating, all that extra, all those shenanigans. Moving on to your extra negate, Kai. So if I was versing aggro, I would side out 2 of the new Kai that replays your Unison and side in 2 of these. It's live from pretty much turn 1 onwards, and it'll give you a little bit more defense because I don't run too many main deck negates. Saiyan cards, you've got your BMS. He's still fantastic in pretty much every format. There's going to be 1 deck or 2 decks you come against that it hits. I played it against my Golden Freezer matchup. Every time he wanted to freeze his call or activate his Icarus Unison, he'd have to ditch 2, so he didn't even bother with it. It just sets their game plan back a little bit. Black doesn't really have the untap hate that all the other colors received in set 7, like your, Kami's the green one, Whis is the yellow one, Borgos is the blue one, and what was the red one? Raditz, I believe. So Black didn't receive that set, so he's probably your next best thing to deal with Golden Freezer. However, something to think about, this card actually shuts down our own deck. So if your opponent goes first and they play this on you, it really stifles your Self-Awakeners, the 1-drops that blocker or crit and help you burst 3. So to deal with that, we have our Godly Aptitude. He's a Saiyan, of course, and he's a 1 energy removal for Masked Saiyan on turn 1 if your opponent plays it on you. It does set you back a little bit, but it's much better than dropping 2 cards every one time you want to play one of your Self-Awakeners from the Warp. Final few cards as well, you have your Gogeta. So again, another Saiyan, which is fantastic. If I needed this one to come in, you just side out the 2 Cumbers and you chuck this boy in. He's fantastic against Indestructible. I was expecting a little bit of God stuff with the new Goku Black deck that was released. Didn't see any of that. He's also fantastic in the Golden Freezer or any yellow matchup as well, because he gets rid of the, what's his name? Divine Transformation, the 5-drop that can't be removed from board. So you smack this on the board and get rid of him. It's just for those problem cards that can't be removed by normal means that only red can really deal with. Going through that though, that's pretty much the entire deck. The only losses of the day were Green Gohan, which is the first place player. Great player, not to take anything away from them of course, but the matchup isn't fantastic for Kai, just because Green has so much Unison removal through the Gohan rare, the new counterplay that rips markers off your Unison. I believe he blew up my 4-marker Unison 3 times in 1 game, which is pretty crazy when your deck relies upon Unison. I haven't really figured out what side tech you'd need for that matchup. Maybe Masked Saiyan, it would stifle some of the Time Chamber stuff, but I don't really think it would hurt the deck too much. Hachiak was my other loss, which is ironic because it's one of my mates and it's pretty much the only deck I ever run at locals. Your deck bursts so much, if you get to turn 5, you're probably dead just from the mill. He ended up coming 5th place as well, so both great players. Managed to beat Golden Freezer, Margin Vegeta, Goku Ape starter deck, and I believe Red U7 Gohan, which was pretty interesting. You don't see that in the top cut too much. Yeah, thanks for that one, guys. That is our Trunks deck profile. A fun black deck for you to try out for your next locals.